Hello, hello. Welcome back to Tea with Terry. My name is Terry, as you all know by now, and I'm excited to bring you all another episode. This week's episode, I have Dr. Keith Green, and before I even start, I want to encourage you all to one, go follow the Caucus page on Instagram if you're here in the city of Chicago. But also, the AIDS Walk and Run is coming up at the end of September, and if you are looking for agencies to support. This is one of them. You can also go online and find other agencies or organizations you'd like to support. I'll be there, and you'll also be able to see a live screening of Tea with Terry, where I'll be interviewing special guests. So stay tuned for that. And also, there is part 3 of HIV Getting to Zero, which will be coming out at the end of next month, August. So if you all are interested, please visit the HIV journeytozero.org page, and it's just journeytozero.org. And you can find out about how you can RSVP for a special reservation to see the film, especially if you're here in Chicago. Or if you're not here in Chicago, take a trip to Chicago. All right. With all that being said, Dr. Keith, introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit about who you are and the type of work that you do.
Sure. So my name is Keith Green. I am currently the executive director for the Chicago Black Gay Men's Caucus. I've been in that role now for, I think, a little over 2 years. I'm a founding member of the organization, was the organization's first board chair, and then went away to school and did a few other things, and have come back in this position really to help to stabilize and put a plan in place for the further growth and development of the organization itself. I have been living with HIV since I was 17 years old. So at this point, that's been about 30 years, actually a little over 30 years at this point. And, really grateful to still be around, still be engaged and involved in the work. I also currently co-chair the Chicago Methamphetamine Task Force, which is a project that's really near and dear to my heart in the moment. And that's kind of my real big focus right now, particularly as it relates to this work.
Okay. So where do you come from? Are you a native to Chicago,
Yes.
transplant? Okay. I'm from the Southside of Chicago, born and
Same.
raised. So I want you to talk to me about, like, you say that you found out your HIV status at 17. So talk to me a little bit about, like, what that experience was, like what that world was, because I think it's a little bit different. I found out my status in 2024, which is a
hmm
couple months ago. So I would love to hear about that experience.
Yeah, definitely a different world. At the time, life expectancy for someone diagnosed with HIV was 8 to 10 years. I was 17 years old, a senior in high school, on my way to college, and it really did a number on my mental and emotional health, particularly considering, my life is just beginning. I'm gonna go to college, and I want to have this big career. I wanted to be an audio engineer, and uh, really, it was depression that sort of pulled me away from those dreams and pursuing that. So I dropped out actually in my second semester of my freshman year. And really, my purpose and intent was just on sort of finding a job that would allow me to take care of myself until, you know, that 8 to 10 years was up, and then that would be that. That fortunately was not God's plan for my life. Things really, things got worse before they got better. In 2001, I was diagnosed with an opportunistic infection known as MAC, Mycobacteria avium complex. And I had a CD4 count of 30 and viral load well into the hundreds of thousands. And in 2002 was given 6 months to a year to live. And so it really was about, um, you know, first of all, it was a choice. I had to make a choice whether or not I wanted to live. And to be very honest, that was not actually an easy choice. A part of me felt like death would be better than living with and dealing with the stigma associated with HIV. And so I toiled with that for a while, but I had a really, really great support system in my family, friends, healthcare team who really pushed me to make a different choice. And so I began to do what I really needed to do to take care of myself. Thankfully, the science of antiretrovirals and HIV treatment had changed drastically, and it completely turned my life around.
Wow. That's wow. I think that there's a lot that you said there that I've never even had to appreciate. I think that while having a lot of these conversations over the last year, one thing I've never had to really think about is my own mortality. I think that that's something that in 2024, when we look at people seroconverting, it's not a conversation we have. So I think that what is it even like to think about, like at 17 too, to even think about like what the next 10 years of my life might look about, or like, even planning that, because I couldn't even plan what the next day looked like at 17,
Yeah.
let alone having to prepare even just the people in my life to even like have those conversations.
Yeah, it was rough, and I remember very clearly. I had a group of friends. Most of them are still my closest friends in high school, and I pulled them together. I told them what was going on, and I said I don't want to talk about it. And which in many respects was probably not the best way to handle it. A little bit selfish, but it was me who was dealing with it. But then I'm letting other people in, so we're all dealing with it.
Yeah.
I was young, we were all young, and I didn't talk about it for like the next until I had to, until I started to become physically ill and had to deal with that whole piece. I really did not talk about it much with anybody, which was also probably a big mistake, particularly considering I had the support. Oftentimes, people don't have anybody that they can tell, and so they are suffering in silence. I suffered in silence by choice,
Yeah.
which was unnecessary and probably caused me a lot more distress and challenge over the long run than I actually needed to. But it was very difficult. Thankfully, my mom uh, took me to one of the top HIV specialist in the country who happened to be here in Chicago. And I started medication early,
Hmm.
but it was, that's the other thing we think about in 2024. Medication is very different than what medication looked like in 1994.
Yeah.
So no protease inhibitors. I was on a regimen early on that included AZT. It was very toxic. It was very, as someone who was, at that point I was 18, taking this regimen. It was, not not easy. Gastrointestinal issues, stomach issues, nausea all the time, fatigue all the time, and so I stopped taking it
Hmm.
very shortly after it was prescribed, and that was a gift and a curse because had I kept taking it, and played around with it, then I would have likely developed resistance that would have potentially impacted future regimens
Mm.
that ultimately did work for me. And so I was able to make the bounce back that I was able to make. But at the same time, it was what led to 30 T cells and a viral load into the hundreds of thousands. So it was a gift and a curse at the time. And I think that's still something we don't talk a whole lot about, particularly with these sort of newer, longer acting regimens and that kind of thing. Like what it means to either and so on the patient side, as an individual, what it means to not really follow through and be adherent, and
Hmm.
and and for my future long term treatment objectives, right? What happens if resistance develops and there are medications that no longer work for me? But then we also have systems that fail people as it relates to longer acting injectables and things of that nature. That what happens when those medications begin to fail people, and then folks have to consider what our future options look like. And let's be clear, there are not a lot of options in the pipeline in the way that there were like in the 90s.
Yeah, I think that you did a really good job of just speaking to like what I see, my experience in like being someone who's sexually active, same gender loving, and introduced. I think when I started to have sex in a way that was a conversation I started to have with my doctor. Basically, that's when I started to. PrEP was already out. I think it was 2014, 2013, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. But I remember going to all the PrEP events and people talking to me about it. And I remember how it was like I started it and then I was like, oh, maybe this isn't for me. And then I started to do this work when I was like 23 and I got back on it and more regularly and stayed on it until losing my position. And that's a whole nother conversation about like healthcare navigation and like co-pays. But
Mm-hmm.
got to a place in my life where okay, now I'm at the injectable at like 30, and I think that that was so many years of me using this but and it working, and this new drug and it not working for me. And I think that like what I've come to understand, just like with the flu shot or the COVID vaccine, you can take it and still might get COVID, still might get the flu. Same thing with like PrEP and like injectable like HIV medication that is preventive. I think my goal in having a lot of these conversations is allowing for that space to understand how something like that could happen, but also like that other side of it. Because another thing you said that was really interesting is kind of like I want you to speak a little bit more about was because for me, when I seroconverted, I had been doing this work well over a decade. Knowing this work, I told my close people, but I didn't want to talk about it. I felt like one, I knew everything. I knew. I felt like at 30, I knew everything that I was supposed to know about it. A lot of self blaming and just anger and confusion. So I think that that's hard while doing the work, but like I want you to talk about like your experience and just telling people. I don't know if you were doing work at 17, but like, you know, what was that like? Because even having that support system there, what do you think back then? Like 17-year-old was like 17-year-old you was like, I just don't want to talk about it, but this is as much as I want you all to know.
I really think it was probably a mixture of denial in some ways, right? But in other ways, it was about like I'm going to carry on with my life,
Mm-hmm.
although my actions spoke differently. I was, like thinking about, well, I'm not gonna continue school and pursue this because I don't have that much time. It doesn't make sense to spend all this time and money in school and it'll amount to nothing. So, but at the same time, I wanted to just kind of live my life,
Right.
right, until it was time to check out. And so I think there was that combination of like in denial, but also not wanting to be defined by that in that
Mm-hmm.
moment, which was, of course, it was challenging. And thankfully, I had the group of friends that I had who were very much, respectful of that and still did what they needed to do to take care of me and to check
Right.
in on me as a friend. Right, that was important. But it was a total, for lack of better words, mind fuck, right? Like
Right.
you at the beginning of what should be, your adult life, having to deal with this thing that says like your adult life will ultimately likely be cut short, and you won't get to achieve these dreams that you have for yourselves and also other people's, because at that time you're really impressionable, right? And you take on all of the stuff that other people put on you. So these expectations of who I would be
Right.
from other people, now it's like, yeah, no, that's probably not going to happen.
Hmm. Wow. That. Yeah, I think that like it's something that I can identify in other black men too. I think that what I have suffered from in my experience in just being a black man, being a black queer man, is understanding that a lot of times when you're young, a lot of people think that they're teaching you, but sometimes they pour their own trauma into you.
For sure.
And I think that that allowed me a lot of space to not talk about certain things in a way that like I feel more comfortable talking about it like 30, you know. I
Hmm.
think that I want to switch gears a little bit here and I want to talk about what was the change? What was that changed in you that made you realize that, you know, you're gonna be here for a long time, you know, and like you want to do something with that time.
So I think, I have to really start from the beginning in that, um, so I was diagnosed via a blood drive.
Okay.
I was always a pretty active person, and I was a part of our senior boys council in high school. We hosted the senior boys council hosted an annual blood drive. I donated, and then received this letter from LifeSource, who did it for us to sort of come out to their offices way out by O'Hare. I'm a Southsider. I grew up
Oh,
Southeast too,
yeah.
so they sent this letter essentially saying like, don't donate any more blood. We need to see you, blah, blah, blah. I'm nervous, freaking out. Like, what is this about? Right. So I take the train all the way from, I went to Hyde Park Academy. So from school, after school, from Hyde Park all the way out to O'Hare. I get out there. Essentially, I'm told, I was asked, like, did you know that you had HIV? And I'm like, well, no, if I did, I probably wouldn't be here
Right.
because, like, so that was traumatizing in and of itself. But I get on the train, come back home, and I heard what I now believe to have truly been the voice of God say, "You'll be okay," which was unimaginable at that particular time, given again, it's 1994, there are no protease inhibitors, life expectancy is 8 to 10 years,
Mm.
right? So fast forward, I'm kind of at that 8, 9-ish year mark, right? 2001, I end up hospitalized in North Carolina. Um, and there were two things that happened. Actually, the first thing was, I was really, really sick, and my doctor came in the room one morning and he said, I'm not sure exactly what's going on, and I'm paraphrasing, but we're not doing a whole lot for you, but keeping you comfortable. And yet you seem to be getting better. And that is something that had, over the time, I was in the hospital for like 3 weeks at the time. And he's like, that's something that over time we're noticing is happening. And so, um, it looks like you may beat this thing and you probably should start thinking about what you want to do with the rest of your life.
Mm.
And I was like, huh, okay. That isn't the news I was expecting to hear, because
Right.
literally I'm 6'4". I weigh a little over 200 pounds now. I was literally at my worst 144 pounds, if you can even imagine what that looks like, right? And so I was, literally, they had given me 6 months to a year to live. I wasn't thinking about that. Then I came back home. It was still a rough ride to recovery. And I remember being in the hospital here in Chicago, and one of my mother's best friends, who's like an aunt to me, she came to visit me, and she said, one thing I know for sure, and one thing I've always known about you, if there's um, if there's a way out, um, if there's a way out of this, you're gonna figure it out. And I was like, that's interesting, right? Like, how is this on me to figure out? How do you think I'm gonna figure this out? But I think, she was right in the sense that, one of the first thing I did was began to really educate myself about HIV and the progress in HIV treatment, to sort of get a sense of like, okay, this is something that can be turned around. I'm already sort of naturally turning around. How do I maximize that? Um, so yeah, that was that journey at that particular time in my life. It was crazy though. It was a very difficult time, particularly physically,
Hmm.
because the impact of, again, opportunistic infections, what was happening inside of my body. Um, Once I did get on medication and it started to work in my immune system, there's immune reconstitution syndrome, all these things right going on. But I think having the education and having a space to talk through these things, which at the time was Test Positive Aware Network,
Hmm.
having the space to learn and to talk through different things really helped.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned space. And I even move on, I wanted to say it's incredible that like your story. I think that as someone who's been doing HIV work since I was like 16, anything from Prodigies of Pride to like
Mm.
Empower, like any
Mm-hmm.
youth group, I think that I've been in Chicago kind of like following, like giving those spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that at 30, when I'm told that I'm HIV positive, yes, that's hard news, like, especially while I'm on the prep, all that stuff, but it really forced me to go back to a lot of those spaces like T-Pan. I think
Mm-hmm.
that like I remember when T-Pan was right there in that little building on 55th, and then they
Mm-hmm.
moved around and they was on the corner for a while. And I just there are products of black men out here who, even when they seroconvert, they are handling it a lot better. So I guess I want to say thank you, but I want to dive into like talk to us about like why those spaces matter so much. Like, and if you can, just talk to us about like what that space looks like, even with the caucus and some of the work that you do.
Mm-hmm. I think first and foremost, um, the support that comes with those spaces, both informal and formal. I think the informal support may even be more valuable than the formal,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because being able to find and connect with people who who get you, and who you get, and can sort of lean on one another, that extends far beyond things that any sort of agency can do, right? A case manager is support, but that support only goes so far.
Yeah.
You meet people in these spaces who, you can call at 11 o'clock at night when you are really having difficulty processing whatever may be going on with you. So I think both the informal and formal aspects of it are important. I also think it's important that, you know, uh, because there's a lot of information, right? And we take in information in different ways and at different times,
Mm-hmm.
right? What may be sort of important to me to know and understand right now may not be the same thing 6 months from now, a year from now, or depending on like my diagnosis or when I started prep or those kinds of things. And so having, you get a prescription, you fill the prescription, you start taking it, you feeling okay about things, but then like 3 months, what happens when you have more questions and more like so having knowing that you have a space where you can access support, access knowledge, access resources, I think is critical. And that's really what we try to do at the caucus, right? So I think we try to provide spaces on a variety of levels, right? So sort of the basic, we can connect you to different resources based on whatever it is that you need, not just related to HIV or PrEP, but the wholeness, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we're all about holistic health and wellness, so mind, body, and soul. And so we're more of a connector space. We don't provide a lot of the direct services. We create space and make safe space for people to feel comfortable enough to say, you know what, this is what's going on with me. I think I need to take advantage of this. What resources out there that are culturally affirming, that I can take advantage of? And then, we also do the same with respect to organizations, right? Because I think, you know, as much as folks like to push one-stop shops,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I don't think that that is the. I know that that is not the solution for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes it can be detrimental to only have this one place I go for everything. Because if
Mm-hmm.
something breaks down in that space, if I'm having a challenge with my provider in that space, then it may cause me to withdraw from all of the other resources.
Oh yeah.
And so we also are a convener and collaborator with a number of organizations to ensure that folks have options and choices, and that there are a variety of resources, again, culturally affirming resources available for our folks. And then we also understand the diversity of our community,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are not monolithic by any means. And so we do what we can to make sure that we're speaking to and tapping into that diversity, right? So we think about our folks within the kink and leather scene. We think about the ballroom scene. We think about younger people. We think about older people, and how we make sure that even if we're not necessarily offering different events that are focused on each of those different populations, but that our events are as inclusive as possible and mindful of that diversity within our community.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to speak personally because I think that I've had experience in some of the book clubs. The last one, I'm sorry, I went to was with Andre Talley's assistant, and I
Mm.
know it's been a while, but
Mm-hmm.
I've just been busy. But the reason I speak to that is that was such a incredible space. It's not only an intergenerational conversation where someone who's 19 and gay can talk to someone who's like 60 and gay, but it also like it allows room for people to have those conversations, and not just the book clubs. I think that another group I think about is the queer people in conversations group.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
always used to struggle with the idea that it was so hard to find like other black gay men and find communities, and the way you all do it here I think is so unique because it's not about getting an HIV test, it's not about connecting you to a case manager, it's truly about connecting you to community. And I felt like I've been in those spaces where I've talked about experiences that I know that unless you are of my skin color and you've gone through some of those things, it would be a little harder to relate. And some of those things that are like uniquely mine, but just affirmed in the space that like you get to have that in a way that I don't think other agencies can always provide outside of like a large event,
Mm-hmm.
or like catering to we want to recruit for something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the importance of when someone like myself is just tested positive for HIV and I'm thinking about where are my resources? Who do I call to connect me to if I'm having a problem because I can't find a case manager? These are
Mm-hmm.
real things that while black is really, really hard already, but like add the extra layer of resources being like commoditized or like only one space having them. And it really
Mm-hmm.
does put a challenge. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to speak to the importance of like you all being on the south side of Chicago too and connecting those people. Like, how have you seen that relationship develop?
Yeah, I think well, so, this is our first actual space in community, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. And that was intentional because we want it to be accessible. We also, it's intentional that we are partner with Alliance Care 360, which their office is literally around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And they offer all of those resources that we don't offer directly, right? So, all of the screenings, HIV, STI, MPOX, etc., vaccinations. They have mental health. They have right. So they offer a variety. So we're partnered with an organization that's close enough.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if anything is happening here that somebody feels like, you know what, I might need to, see a therapist or
Right.
whatever, we can very easily make a phone call and get somebody in quickly. Um, and so I think it is important for us to be located on the South Side and for our community to have this space that, while we do have scheduled and structured programming, we also get a number of people who just kind of drop by, right?
Mhm.
And hang out, work. Will set up their laptop and work here. Like we don't mind that. Like we
Mhm.
like to have that kind of that freedom for people to feel like I, people may not want to talk. They may not want to do therapy, or they might not be able to get
Mhm.
into therapy. But I just want to sit and be someplace where I feel safe and comfortable. Like and one other thing that I'll say, you mentioned the Queer People in Conversations group, and I'm really, really proud of that work, largely because it's not our work.
Mhm.
That was started by a young man who came to a retreat that we did. He found community in a major way, in a lot of different ways, from sort of Caucus or Caucus adjacent programming, saw a gap and
Mhm.
filled it, and we provide the space and the resources. Like, you want to host this group, yes, you can host it in our space, yes, we'll find a way to feed people when they're here, right? Like that kind of thing. Is that I'm really proud of that, really, just for that reason, because it is certainly community driven and community sustained, and he's doing such a wonderful job with it.
Yeah, I think that I was at the last conversation, and this person just has a really great way of letting those spaces kind of like cultivate and like those conversations be so natural.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I loved about it was there was three people on the panel, and I was like, oh my god, there's something I relate to in this person. There's something in a way that I don't often feel like you can have outside of like a club or a
Mm-hmm.
formal event, or
Mm-hmm.
a lot of us don't work at a LGBT nonprofit or a
Mm-hmm.
space that like we are surrounded around queer people. Sometimes, most times, we are often the only queer people or gay people in the space, and
True.
there's a lot of stealthing that has to happen just out of survival. So I think that like when I think about those spaces, I think about the importance of it, whether it's be a movie night or game night, and the importance of like community deciding that like, hey, this would be really cool to have a group here, you all providing that space. I think about I can hop on a bus here and get here in like 15-10 minutes versus having to go all the way up north just to
Mm-hmm.
feel like I can be safe and queer and things like that. And I think I want to talk about that a little bit about like how have you seen in your work since you all have had a space here, kind of like community reception, to it's not just the work that you're doing, but the actual space you all are providing.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I have to also give credit to our team, and particularly our program coordinator Pierre, who has done a really phenomenal job with decorating and being intentional about what the space looks like and how it's set up. But we get lots of great feedback. Actually, a colleague who's helping us with an initiative hadn't been to the space yet, and he was here the other night for a meeting, and he said, I really wasn't expecting this. I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't expecting this. And I just feel it feels welcoming and
Yeah.
calming. And that kind of means the world to us, right? That
Hmm.
people actually, not it's not just something we want to achieve, but when people come into the space, they actually feel it.
Yeah.
And so that the reception has been amazing. We outgrew this space technically, after being in it just for a couple of weeks, really, because I think we hosted our first movie night, and there were like over 20 folks in this room, and it's like that's a lot of people in this space, right? And so we're certainly thinking about what the next
Hmm.
what the next space looks like. Do we want to have multiple spaces? Do we, but I think we'll certainly always be south.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I would love to see y'all in South Shore. I don't know. It's something
I would
about
love that
like
too.
it's just something. My mom lives in South Shore. That's where me and my friends hung out. We used to go to Rainbow Beach when they had Black Pride there. And
Hmm.
personally, I think that like that is the space where I have found like other Black gay community in a way that like I have never been able to find in like on the South Side of Chicago. But that's
Hmm.
just my own dream.
South Shore is the black gay mecca of Chicago.
Yeah,
It is the North Halsted of
definitely.
Chicago, for black folks specifically.
I think there was something you said around just earlier in the conversation. We talked about like how important these spaces are. I think that what's one thing that you would hope to see in like, because I think that I've been a part of these spaces and I will definitely say like it gets crowded in here quick. But that I think that speaks to the need of a space like this too on the South Side, so intentional about we aren't just trying to get you through our doors, we also want to create space for you. So I guess my question is like, what is your hope for like if you all had another space, like what does that look like? What does that feel like?
Um, that's a great question. So actually, there's been some conversation with a couple of other black-led, community-focused organizations about a sort of shared community center
Wow.
space.
That's incredible. Yeah.
That would, I think, absolutely be amazing. It is, of course, further down the road
Right.
and requires a great deal of planning and organizing and that sort of thing. But that would be really, really cool to have, space within a space, right? So a
Right.
space that exists specific for us in this space, but then there's this shared space where, who knows what could be there. Very much like, a center on Halsted type model, but
Hmm.
on the South Side, and with a number of partnered organizations sort of collectively sharing space, which means that we could be in that space. We could have a satellite space. There's so many different options and opportunities to think about. But I really, that's something that I'm invested in. It's a lot of meeting, a lot of planning, but that's something I'm certainly like, yeah, I would love to see something like this happen for
That's
sure.
so incredible. I love the idea of outside spaces all coming together. And like my first thought is like there's a building where, I can get an HIV test and then on the second floor I can get access to like housing resources from
Hmm.
all these different agencies. I think a one-stop shop a lot of times, but in the sense of like agencies coming together and not one
Right,
agency trying to offer everything.
right,
Because as a nonprofit minor in college, one thing I've learned about nonprofits is the hardest thing they have to do is try to fight every fight,
right,
and it's sometimes you end up losing all of them.
right.
Um,
Partnerships matter, and
yeah,
collaborations, true collaborations and partnerships are incredibly important.
I want to ask you one of my final questions.
Okay.
I think I want to talk to you about like we've had these conversations about journey to zero and what does that look like? How does it how do we get there? I want you to talk about what are your thoughts about like that? Like, what is somebody who's living with HIV? How are they a part of that conversation? How is the Caucus working to help get to zero? And how are you personally a part of that?
Yeah. There's so many pieces, right? I
Right.
think, as people living with HIV, um, our role and contribution is, first to take care of ourselves, right? Because we know that undetectable does equal untransmittable.
Right.
And so, um, taking care of ourselves, in the best way that we can to avoid and prevent the spread of HIV is critically important. I think it also is a matter of, ensuring that we are as educated as we can be, because I think that's still a huge thing. I feel like one thing I've noticed is a shift in educational type programs,
Hmm.
where everything is really, really condensed. Like, for example, um, I'm a a product of the a program at TPAN that was called Team Treatment Education Advocacy Management,
Mm.
and it literally taught me so much, not just about, you know the importance of taking HIV medications, but like what they do, how they
Mhm.
work, why you need to take them on time. I think people don't necessarily, because we live in a culture where you take medication when you're not feeling well, when you're sick,
Mhm.
right? You with HIV, you're taking medication even though you may be feeling perfectly fine, right? Why is it important to keep doing that? What is it doing within your body to help both fight the virus, but also keep your immune system healthy? What does that translate, or how does that translate into taking medications for PrEP? I think the education piece is still critically important, not just for people living with HIV, but also for people who may be quote unquote at risk for HIV.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think we need to bring a lot of that back. We forget that, every day there's a new population of young people, particularly, but not just young people, because I've encountered men who are in their 30s who were married
Mhm.
and never engaged in gay sex in any way. Maybe had the thought, or maybe right, and now they're coming out. And so we need to realize that this is an ongoing thing. We can't just say we've done this and stop. It's got to keep happening because people are coming into their own and into their sexuality on a consistent basis.
Right.
So the education piece is really, really something that it is really important to me. I also am, I think I say this a lot, and I really do mean it. Like we're not going to get to zero without addressing the most marginalized amongst
Yeah.
us, and that includes very specifically people who are engaged with substances and have substance use disorders. Oftentimes, we like to we think about it only from the treatment side of
Right.
things, right? And not everybody's interested or necessarily even needs treatment for substance use, right? People use substances for a variety of reasons, and we need to make sure that we're supporting people with respect to how they use safely.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
we're also in a space where you don't necessarily know what you might be getting on the street when it comes to substances. And so I feel like a focus in this area is absolutely necessary if we're going to get to zero. Um, and then, of course, the efforts that we engage in to reduce stigma and counter narratives about people living with HIV, about queer people, about down low men, that kind of
Mhm.
thing is going to also be critically important. Is critically important.
Wow. Yeah. I think that all those things coming together definitely helps with us getting to zero. I think that the part around people living with HIV, staying healthy, understanding their medication, I think that's so important. I too came from that generation a little bit where maybe it was the tail end of it too, because I remember what it was like to go to a all day prep like course where they're teaching you about this is what prep is. That's literally how I learned about how prep works in the body as a shield around the cells in a way that it's no shade or anything, but like when I tested positive for HIV, here's your medication. You take them, and we're going to check your viral loads to see if you got to undetectable at in 30 days. So there was no conversation about like, oh, these are gonna make you really sick, by the way, or like
Mm,
really really sleepy. And I think those are conversations I had with people who have been like living with HIV for years, like, yeah, that's the medication. Or I was able to give them the name of my medication and they looked it up for me in a way that, like, the provider I had is great, but in a way that I just felt like it's more than just me being tired. I need you to explain how this is working in my body and why do
hmm
I feel so tired.
hmm
And I remember someone telling me, give it a month and I promise you'll feel better. And because I was at a point where I was like, I don't want to take this,
hmm
I didn't feel sick or anything. So I
hmm
think that even the space to talk about that, like at 30 was a lot, I think, to even realize I'm going to take this pill for the rest of my day,
hmm
like rest of my life. That was a lot to process. And I think that the spaces exist, but not in a way that we often think that are accessible.
Yeah.
You know, I think that yes, there's an HIV group that is hosted on a Thursday, but it's all the way up north, and I'm a student and I'm working. That's not accessible,
That's
you
not
know. And
accessible.
I think that like not accessible in a way that like I know this is like right up the street from my house, and they do groups here that I can feel comfortable to even like unpack some of the stuff that, or just be in a space where I can listen and I
Mm-hmm.
might learn something in a way that like I couldn't appreciate, or just to get out of a funk because I can't sit in this house or lay in this bed and keep feeling the way I've been feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's one thing that stands out to me because there's so much learning I've done with just like the conversations of people living with HIV in a way that I always think like I wish there was like almost a course or something that taught me like exactly what you're saying. Like, this is how the medication's gonna work in your body. This is why you need to take the medication. This is some of the side effects. And I think that we are living this digital age where yes, you can look up medication or everything, but we also understand I understand now that I have a lot of privilege in spaces, like privilege in the idea that I like to read in a way that like I may have issues with dyslexia, but that doesn't stop me from like
Mm-hmm.
doing research in a way
Mm-hmm.
that like if someone who's not me who suffers with dyslexia, they're not gonna go, this is too overwhelming, you
Right.
know? So
Right.
I really appreciate a lot, even with substance use, the idea that you can reach out to the caucus and find access to safer fentanyl kits and
For
things
sure.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think those things are super important when we think about like what does it actually mean to get to zero? Because it's more than just people who are living with HIV who are doing the work, but how do we also protect people who come into HIV outside of sex? And I think that's a conversation that we don't always like to have because we have this idea around people who use substances, but I like that what the caucus is doing is kind of like putting these labels up. Like it's not about the people; it's about the fact that folks are dying, and we're preventing that.
That's right.
So that's just some of the incredible work that you all are doing, and I'll thank you for this conversation today. Is there anything you want to leave
Oh.
us with, a message, or anything you want to tell us before we end today?
I want to say thank you for doing this work. I think the the documentary series itself is important and phenomenal. But I think that this piece of the work is also important, just as important, and helps to kind of you only get so much time in
Yeah,
each episode. That's why it's 3 episodes. It probably could have been a whole series.
10
But
episodes. Yeah.
being able to take a deeper dive is critically important. And so using your platform to engage people and to bring awareness and education and more conversation is important. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I always feel like a lot of what I'm doing is literally because I grew up in an age where I got to appreciate. I saw a lot of Black people who are gay and who were doing the work. My first experience was with someone named Antonio Jackson, who was a director at COH like back in 2009. But that was my first experience outside of my uncle who died of AIDS complications. That like I
Mm,
saw a Black man in community that was really trying to help and do something. And I remember I always saw that image because I'm like, that's exactly what I want to do.
mm,
Like little Terry me sees that, and I think that's when I see the people who are like you, who've done this work and like help it. It's like that's why this exists because I talk about this so that someone in rural Illinois knows that if they come to Chicago, these are the spaces they can reach out to
mhm.
find those places. It's not where they live in; it's about where they're going.
Yeah.
So I appreciate this conversation. I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you all, Dr. Keith Green. If you all want to know more about the caucus, please follow them on social media, follow them on Instagram. You all have a Facebook as well?
Yep. We are on Facebook at the Shy Caucus on Instagram.
There we go.
Yeah.
Uh, the Shy Caucus on Instagram.
Yes.
And just so you all can make sure you all keep up to date, there's a lot of events coming up with the caucus, so I encourage you all to follow their page. Uh, make sure you all go to journeytozero.org so you all can reserve tickets for part 3.
Yes.
It's coming out at the end of August. I will be on a panel there, so it'll be lovely to see y'all in person. And thank you all for continuing to watch. I got some really special episodes coming up where I'm going to be traveling around, so look forward to that. You all have a great one and take care.